Welcome to the interview portion of Power Talk. I'm here today and privileged to be with a gentleman that I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm introducing you to him. You haven't been around very much. It's probably more of a reintroduction, and that is Dr. Wayne Dyer. We're here in Hawaii in his escape route where he's writing another book. And if you're not familiar with Wayne, you should be. Certainly he's written some of the best-selling books of all time in the area of personal development. Your Erroneous Zones, Pulling Your Own Strings, The Sky's the Limit, Gifts from Icus, and his newest book, You'll See It When You Believe It. Wayne, I just want to first thank you for letting me get a chance to share with your family. My first introduction to you in person.
Was great. Wasn't that great?
Yeah, that was great. I walked in to see Wayne and his family, and I got attacked by 7 children.
Kids know, though, Tony. I was really impressed because when they walked in, my children are very open and very loving, but very often a stranger will walk in and they are very skeptical and they check you out first, like animals do. And they jumped right onto you. So I think there's an invisible quality that people send out. And I think if you have a love for children, that says an awful lot about you. And of course I have it in great depth because my children are the most important things in my life. Yeah. And I can tell that you're a wonderful daddy too. It's nice having you there.
I appreciate that very much. Well, I think one of your gifts, from my perception, is the ability to have that child be totally alive inside of you. And that's where happiness comes from when it's natural. But why don't we start out by getting we always start our Power Talks finding a little background on people.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us, where did this philosophy of no limits, this lifestyle of really living life to the fullest, where did all this come from for you? Where did it start? I know you had some painful challenges starting out in your childhood.
Yeah, well, they were challenges. They weren't painful.
Oh, that's good.
Truly, they weren't. They were painful for my brother. See, I grew up I spent 6 or 7 years in a series of foster homes. My mother had 3 boys by the time she was just a very young woman, and my father had spent some time in prison, and he was abusive and an alcoholic and an irresponsible person, and he stole from everyone, and this is why he went to jail. And he also just abandoned his family when I was just an infant. I was born in 1940, and my brothers were born in 38 and 36, so there was a depression at that time. It was a horrible financial times. My mother was working as a candy girl for Kresge's on the east side of Detroit, making $17 a week and trying to feed 3 children and figure out how to deal with the beatings that she was getting and the abuse and so on. So I ended up in a series of foster homes with my brother. My oldest brother went with my grandmother, and we were all reunited when I was almost 10. I come from a position at this point in my life that there are no accidents, that the universe is on purpose.
I agree.
And I know I know your material as well as you know mine. I listen to your tapes and read your books and know that we have a lot of similarities there. And I think that the childhood experiences that you get, even the ones that we quote call painful, are lessons, and there are exams given, and we either pass them or we just keep repeating them. Yes, that's right, over and over again. Yeah. And so I look back upon that. I try to look back very objectively on those years when I was in a foster home and in the years when I was away from my mother and things were happening that everybody else would sort of categorize as horrible and painful. And when you're a kid, you don't wake up every day and say, I'm an orphan again today, isn't this awful?
Yeah. Unless somebody teaches you to think that way.
That's right, unless you process. And I was always the one in the places that I lived where a mother would bring in a new child. It was just, all it was just poverty. I mean, it was just, nobody had anything, and so everybody that ended up in these various homes was just because they didn't have anything. It wasn't anything other than that. And the mothers would bring their children in, or the church would bring a child in, and they'd always say, go get Wayne. And I was always out and back either playing or meditating or having a good time, because it was on a farm. I mean, there were chicken coops, and there was a lot of apple trees and peach trees, and it was just, to me, it was just where I was. I mean, what else do you know? Yeah. And they'd say, where's Wayne? And I'd come and they'd say, Wayne, this is Martha. I remember one time, and this little Martha was crying, and she was all upset, and they said, Wayne, teach her how to spell her name. And I was about 3 years old. I had no idea how to spell Martha. And I just started guessing at it, and she said, no, that's not right, and we went off, and it was like I was the one that somehow had my purpose, whatever it is that you want to call it, was about teaching other people that they didn't have to be depressed because of the circumstances of their life. And I seem to always have known that. My next oldest brother, Dave, didn't, and he suffered a lot in that and had some real tough circumstances later on that he created in his life, although he's beyond them now.
Did that motivate you, seeing his pain, to change your approach, do you think? Or
yeah.
Or do you think it was just inborn within you?
I just think that he has his path and I have mine, and that we are biologically connected, but that spiritually he was in a different place than I was. And a lot of the things that I believe are like you have to be generous. If you're not generous, you know, when it's difficult, you won't be when it's easy.
Yes.
So it's like being generous was always something that I knew about. So that helping my brother was just something that was just in me. And when it was time to help him when he was an adult, it was just like you give him a certain part of what you have, and that all came back to me 1,000-fold, and it just continued to do so. His pain wasn't obvious when he was a little boy. It was like he later on in his life began to look back at that. And his looking back at it, he processed it in a way that it wasn't. It really wasn't that way, because each day, I remember, we had a terrific time each day.
You make a really interesting point, because so often people who are depressed or see themselves as depressed, that's part of their identity, and they have great times throughout the day, but at the end of the day they don't remember any of it.
Yes,
you know, and they say,
right.
oh, I'm so depressed all the time.
I think that's one of the key differences between successful and unsuccessful people, by the way, is that successful people have a tendency to really recall the good.
Yes.
They remember. I mean, I think of my days at Mrs. Scarf's house out in Mount Clemens at 231 Town Hall Road, and I think the only painful day I can ever remember was the day that her husband died. And it was just, I just didn't understand. I mean, he was there one moment and he was gone the next. And the only other one is I had appendicitis when I was a child, and I got rushed to the hospital. But when I think of my time in the hospital with appendicitis in 1948, I remember the flowers, and I remember the people. I remember the nurses. There's a big black nurse who would come in and put us on her knee, because they had to give us penicillin in those days in these huge, and they used dull needles and huge doses. And she was always the one who would coddle me and take it. I mean, I remember seeing my mother every day. I mean, she came to the hospital every day after working where she was, and that was just glorious. I don't remember any other part of it, and I have a tendency to do that. I've been through a divorce, and I talked to my ex-wife, who is now remarried, and I'm remarried, and our lives are in nice places, and we're very good friends and all that. But whenever we would talk about what was going on in our marriage, she would always point out all of these things that I didn't even remember. You didn't take the kid on Halloween. I said, well, I remember being there on Halloween. I have I don't know whether I just created this or whatever, but I look back on my marriage to my ex-wife as a wonderful time. I think she was great. We just had to move along. I've never looked back and thought, oh, isn't that awful? Never done that.
Well, you talk so much about having reality-based thinking. And yet, isn't reality based on whatever we focus on?
Oh, yeah. Reality is just what I think about all day long. We are what we think about all day long. And it's like, that's the most important learning I think I have come to over the years, is that this body that we're in is really just like it's like a garage where we park our soul, you know. It's just a place to put it, you know, and so you take good care of it and you do all of that, but this isn't what it is. I've talked often about when my grandmother died, and they weighed her just before she went to the hospital. She weighed 133 pounds, and life left her body. Her body didn't weigh any less. I mean, her life, her very life, was invisible and weightless, as is everyone who's listening to it now. Yes. So you're just sort of trapped in this body temporarily, and you ought not to be thinking of it as who you are, but your reality is how you process it. Yeah. And that's one of the great lessons. I was talking to one of your producers, John, yesterday, about somebody here who had come up to me and was very negative toward me, which is very rare. Do I ever attract anything like that? So this morning I was meditating on that, thinking, why did I attract this negative person who was very angry at me for being on his property when I shouldn't be, or something like that? And I kept getting back into meditation, and it's like it bothered me for a whole day. And then I was like over it in a second, satori, instant awakening. It was like, this is only a problem for you because you process it. The guy who came into your life in a negative way is just the path that he's on. Yeah. Your reality is how you are living with it. Yes. You know, it's like he came in to teach you a lesson. Yes. And the lesson is that you don't have to process him like that any longer. And it was gone. I realized that it was all totally within my power to let him go and to send him love. And I did. I sent him a couple of books. I found out where he works, and you know, and I sent him a lesson. It may take him 20 years before he even reads it, or he may never get it on this path. He may have to go through it all kinds of times and carry around that arrogance. But it's not mine. I don't have to own any of that. Yeah. It's a wonderful. It's the most freeing thing you have in the world, to know that you can process life any way you want to.
And when you say process, let's clarify that. You really mean changing the way you think about things, the way the questions you ask yourself,
process
the way you
it internally. Absolutely, yeah.
You've gone through an incredible evolution and in the spotlight, you know, over the